George Lucas and Steven Spielberg helmed the return of the dime novel adventure with the release of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark under the Lucasfilm banner, and starring Harrison Ford after his breakout role in the Star Wars movies. Indiana Jones became a pop culture phenomenon on par with the Star Wars media empire, thus cementing Lucasfilm as a haven of science fiction, magic, and reckless adventure. While the movies stopped a-comin', at least until nostalgia demanded their return, Lucas still had stories to tell in the 90s by focusing on the adventures of Indiana Jones as a child and teenager, a storytelling angle teased in the beginning of The Last Crusade. The resulting creation was the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, an edutainment TV series that ran from 1992 to 1996 and featured Sean Patrick Flannery and Corey Carrier in the titular roles of teen and child Indy, respectively, traveling the world and witnessing history along the way. So while they had kids and young adults on the hook to tune into the weekly adventures of Kid Indy,
Henry, straight back.
I hate her. She's a witch.
Lucasfilm figured they could cash in by also making some video games.
We did have the most amazing journeys together.
The first game to feature young Indy was shopped out to Jaleco, a prolific game publisher based in Japan, which had previously published the NES port of Maniac Mansion for Lucasfilm. While that game has many devoted fans who discovered adventure games through the ambitious console port, the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles for NES was an original creation from developer Chris Gray Enterprises, who did not receive credit in the game but got their due in the game's manual. Harkening back to 2D combat platformers such as Contra from the height of the NES, the game lifted events from the TV series in which Indy joins the Mexican Revolution, fights in the trenches of World War I, and serves as a spy in the French army. In execution, the game features the graphics and gameplay of a game that might have been well received in 1988, but felt distinctly behind the times by 1992. When the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis were bringing more visually and mechanically interesting games to players. And while it may have missed its chance at appreciation by being a game out of time, an analysis in hindsight reveals a game with tight, snappy controls and the kind of challenging level design which may be difficult, but not unreasonably so. It is a notable highlight in the grand scheme of 2D platformers based on Indiana Jones. So if the NES game is the highlight, Instruments of Chaos starring young Indiana Jones for the Sega Genesis, aka Mega Drive, is perhaps scraping the bottom of the barrel. This 2D platformer, developed by Brian A. Rice and Waterman Design, and published by Sega, is a technically ambitious game that borrows elements of Indy's spy games during World War I, but tells an original story about young Indy's efforts to stop German spies from purchasing advanced weapons technologies sold by traitorous scientists in England, Egypt, India, and Tibet. The world-hopping nature of the game reminds us of the simpler adventures from the movies, and the environments are certainly varied, if comically or offensively stereotypical in the depiction of people from those regions. The game may be pretty, but the gameplay casts a long and ugly shadow across the landscape. Simply put, controls and physics in this game are terrible. Jumping involves making fiddly adjustments and generally overshooting the target. And the physics of colliding with enemies and objects in the environment makes you wonder if the gravity has been set to match that of the moon. Enemies fly all over the place, and in addition to ground-based enemies who defy the laws of nature, the level designers peppered the levels with numerous flying enemies to harass the player at every turn. One of the positive qualities of the game is the whip weapon, which can be twirled and slashed across the screen with a satisfying sense of weight to it. But the limited damage range still makes for a frustrating experience. All in all, it's a game that suffers from ambitious technology and lack of time to develop it properly. While there were additional games in development for both Sega CD and PC, they were all cancelled soon after Instruments of Chaos shipped in 1994, the same year that the TV series was cancelled. This spelled the end of Young Indiana Jones in video games, at least until Young Indiana Jones became briefly relevant again around the release of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, the fourth entry in the mainline movie series. Seeing an opportunity for synergistic co-marketing, Lucas and producer Rick McCallum spent years preparing Young Indiana Jones for his triumphant return on DVD in the lead-up to the movie. Each of the 3 DVD sets included a bonus PC game developed by Riverdeep and Asylum Entertainment, using the Macromedia Flash engine. While visually very Flash-like, the mashup of adventure, survival, and trivia gameplay is oddly successful at capturing the entertainment nature of the TV show, requiring players to both read and play through some of the critical historical events that young Indy experiences on the TV show.
Do you know who developed the first successful serum cure for snake bites?
The game in the Volume 1 DVD set is called Revolution, and recounts Indy's time fighting alongside Pancho Villa in the Mexican Revolution, which is also referenced in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull.
Technically, I was kidnapped.
By Pancho Villa.
Volume 2 features Special Delivery, a perilous journey across the African Congo in which Indy learns about colonialism.
The Belgians want to own African soil. Same as the Germans. No difference.
And that fighting a war isn't as simple as pointing a gun across a battlefield.
Civilized men might think that's barbaric, but I don't think so. At least they place some value on life. That's more than I can say for my fellow Europeans.
The third and final game is Hunting for Treasure.
Indy, do you know what they call the city of Alexandria?
Based on the feature-length episode, Young Indiana Jones and the Treasure of the Peacock's Eye. This classically structured Indy adventure sees Indy and his friend Remy go on a treasure hunt after the end of World War I. Learning what it means to pursue one's dreams and testing their friendship along the way.
You do not mean it. We make a great team. Why quit the partnership now? A friend doesn't quit halfway through.
It's tough to predict how lesser-known Lucasfilm properties, such as Young Indiana Jones, will fare in the year of our Disney 2022. With the 5th Indiana Jones movie scheduled for 2023, starring an 80-year-old Harrison Ford, the character will certainly still be in the zeitgeist.
This is not as you said it would be, Dr. Jones! I got it back to you, didn't I? Yes, but for how long?
Fans of the younger incarnations of the character can only wait and see how Disney will choose to acknowledge the legacy of the character. But the thought of seeing video games based on that legacy is the kind of wishful thinking now left behind in a time of laissez-faire licensing and simpler technology.
Well, things can't always be the way you want them to be. But sometimes they are.